Okay, what do you see? There we go. We'll see how we go. I just want to try and get you a bit closer in there, but without getting it on this shot of the camera. That's pretty good. Okay. And I want to remember to keep checking that my camera a little bit throughout the class to make sure its focus is okay. So now, normally at this point, well, because this is quite a light flower, I think it has enough colour on it that I can start doing detail without having to do any more big washes over top. I leave the detail to last almost, if I can, because obviously, I mean, it is watercolour, and if you do need to add a bit more depth and colour, then it can get a bit tricky if you need to add big washes and so on. It will move things underneath, which, you know, once we've done all that work, you don't really want to ruin it. So I do leave this kind of detail to last. And I can now, let's see, I'll just open up a couple of photos and see where I want to start, like normal. Oh, it's quite chilly here now in France, and my hands are cold. I've got a heater under my desk, keeping my legs warm. That's nice. So I'm not too bad actually, but I am kind of further away from the fire in this corner where I'm set up, so I have additional heating support. Let's see, I'll take a bit of this. So this is really the time when we do the, what I might do is do some of it, and then I'll sort of stop the recording and zoom in and do a little bit where you can see it in the recording closer. So this is that whole, you grab any old sort of brush that you can be a little bit bad with and do all that kind of stuff. I know Bronwyn knows that very well. How's your technique on that, Bronwyn? Have you...
It's
slowly getting better, yeah. But it's all about practice, isn't it? And it's weird just how... It's surprising how strong the wash can be. For instance, that wash that's like that, and then when you smush out your brush and do that, it's so much lighter. It's always really surprising how that works actually. So we're not going to be doing that red today. All right, so let's pick. You know what? I think I'm going to do magenta, because this has got a blue, and we'll probably do blue, but I think I'll do some magenta and focus on this petal for a few moments. So we'll see what sort of strength we need for that. And obviously you do it on a dry paper. I don't wet the paper or anything for this, and that's where I find the paper needs to be really dry for this technique, otherwise the lines don't come out crisp and they start sort of washing together. So if we pick a little spot that's very light, you may not even see it on your video, but that's what we want, something quite light for the beginning stages really. So I just, for those who don't see me do it very often, that's what I sort of do. And there's always a little bit of wash of colour that's left on that palette that I sort of use to come back to and you know, test on my paper. That's pretty good actually. And I don't really go back into there. I just come back onto this and pick up any sort of residue of wash. And see, there's quite a good example of just a little bit of colour. It actually lasts quite a while. You'd think that would dry quite quickly, but it doesn't, so it's really quite handy. Now let's see, so in general this is quite a dark part of the petal, so we can just start lightly, and I just sort of bring the brush down sort of softly on our little tide marks, shall we say, between the pink and what is the white part of the petal that's in our photo is quite dark and grey. Just sort of starting, just a little warm up really, seeing if there's any sort of lines of colour that we can get going. It goes all the way up to the top, so we can sort of do that. We want this part to be more pink. Obviously I just follow the line of the curve of the petal. There's somebody else. Yay. Okay, oops, there we go. So let's pop on a little bit more, a little bit of a test. And if you've got too much sort of water wash on your brush, it tends to just sort of join back together, so it needs to be dry enough that you get those lines. Oh, wait a second, there's a bit of an overspill on the top edge there. That's the thing, this brush is perhaps a tiny bit big. Oh, I've said this before, you know. It could be a little bit smaller. It would be handy, but we use what we've got when we're in lockdown. So some of the lines come in stronger and some I miss altogether, and that's all good. Kind of quite often whatever happens I'll just emphasise that. So for instance, there's a little line there that I can just come in and strengthen up maybe. But for now, in general, let me just move my palette, it's kind of in the way. And all the lines of this petal sort of come this way, so I definitely want to make sure. Still do that. Need a little bit more colour. Yes, it will. Yeah, everything dries much quicker when you're painting in heat. Now this first this first application of this is normally pretty not rough, but it's not super pretty straight away. It does take a little bit of time again to build this up, so that's why you've got to give yourself a little bit of colour. That's why I sort of don't bring the petal to 90% done. I want it sort of almost done, but enough that I can add some more washes without going too dark. And it just needs to be because possibly, I mean, I would do at least 3 or 4 layers of this, like this, in different ways. Whether that's first in this magenta and then I'll add a couple of other layers of colour and something else here, because it's this sort of petal over here. I'll do it in perhaps in a purple or in a blue. So it's still just splayed edge at the moment. See how it stays like that? It's brilliant. It's very handy. Now, because we've possibly got almost barely anything on here, nothing much I should imagine, I might just come into this area just a little bit, just to sort of help blend that through and down. And then also, I turn the brush over quite a bit and use the edges for anything that I see that's starting to sort of develop, whether that's a couple of lines that are a little bit stronger than others that I can sort of use as maybe a stronger vein. And I start moving away from what's actually in front of me in the photo and start looking a bit more about what's happening on the paper. Because of course doing these sort of more random lines, you can't control necessarily where everything is going to show up. Whether you get a few little, there's a little bump here that's sort of turned out, a little highlight that I can emphasise, mostly because it's just a little something more interesting. But we definitely start to sort of move away from exactly what's on the photo, so that's where you need to have a little look and see if there's anything there that is that you can use. So you just have to take your time. Strangely, there always seems to be a bit more paint on the brush than you expect, and it seems to last for a while. So I just slowly do exactly this, move over the petal with whatever's sort of on my brush. I don't need to add sort of too much more at this point. Just see. But obviously this is lovely and soft, this flower colours, so whatever's on your brush and you like to sort of wash will do. And you may be able to see, I can just sort of start seeing where there's a few ridges of colour there, which I want to emphasise a little more. So I just run my brush down there. And it gets quite dark in down this end of this petal, this sort of curve. So we'll be able to add something more to that in a little while. So still just, let's see over here though, can definitely do a bit more. So in a way, while I guess, you know, I'm not sure whether this would work so well. If you do it with a fine brush, what you don't get is that feathering, that you can just move things around. For instance, if I did it with, because I sort of do use the edges and maybe just a few of the bristles and things like that. But doing it with a brush like this, for instance, this hasn't got anything on it, but I don't think you're going to get the same sort of feel, strangely, as if you do it with this bigger brush and let the bristles just move out and around like that, because then you can kind of, it also holds a lot more water like this, so I can still get some colour on the paper, for instance. Right, so I'm still, if I can still do that for quite some time and still get colour. Whereas with little brushes, of course, they don't have the same reservoir of colour. They can't keep any sort of wash of colour coming through for that long. They do dry up just because they are littler. So that's why I think I still, even if I'm going to paint something quite small, like some little lines, still quite handy to have it in a big brush, I think. And here, this sort of edge we need to do, but we need to be careful of whether your line of your petal is coming actually. So you can imagine it should be coming up through, straight through here and up. So that line should be a little straighter. And now I would definitely bring some of that paint over that highlighted edge, because we are going to need to start blending that edge out a little.
I've lost you. I've only got a J.
How's that? Okay. And Miffy keeps asking to join, but she doesn't come through. I wonder if she's having trouble joining. Let's see. Seems a bit strange. Hang on.
There's J.
Here we go. Let's see. I keep allowing. Well, there's another person trying to enter the group. There we go, that seems better. Okay. So as as my brush gets sort of drier, and I know that it's drying up a little bit, that's when I move to parts of the petal where I want it to be much softer, and I don't want anything too strong and dramatic just yet.
Sorry, hi everyone. I'm not sure what happened. I've been sitting waiting to the meeting to start.
Oh.
It just said the host will let me in soon.
That seems a bit weird, to say the least. We did hear you come in sort of several times, and I would accept, and then you didn't seem to connect, I guess. Okay, let's see. Okay. So I'm starting from the shadow part of the petal and just dragging it up through into the somewhat lighter part of the petal, and it's still in shadow. We still need to add some of that. Okay, so sort of around 1, I think, for that colour. And when you're doing that kind of using the brush like this, you do need to make sure you sort of tidy up your edges in a way, because you may not get quite so close down to, say, this part of the petal here, and you're starting just a little further away, so you want to make sure you bring any of that colour right down to your edge. So this is, I guess this is the good stuff. I mean, but this does take time, and it's just you're slowly going through all the parts and sort of building up. And of course, it's great because you're not adding a lot of water. Everything dries very quickly, so you can just continually work on this. And you don't have to sort of go away to somewhere else and come back, because you're not using a lot of water, so there is a really quick, almost instantaneous drying time, which is kind of nice for the flow of things, because you can get into the flow of painting something, and then if you have to move on and leave it because you need it to dry, then it can be. And so it's better to sort of keep going, I find, somehow. So that's a good way, a good thing, really. super dry, it dries quite quickly. I might just grab my little brush, my little square brush, and just soften this edge. It's not really a highlight or anything like that, but I just wanted to make sure it was always lighter. Okay, what other photos do we have? And the back is reasonably sort of in soft out of focus part of the petal. We could just pop in a little bit more colour. So what I might do is I'm going to refocus the camera closer down on here, because just doing this, you do that for the whole of the flower, but I might just focus a little bit closer in so you can see a little bit more. So just a moment.